Poor characterization, weak narration from the plunge over Jane, the final relish to the pointless plot, description so apparent, the Romans held some in the 1,000-yard stare. Book is thick, but nothing will stick, gotta take my chances, well, die flick, but the worst of all, the reason I weak didn't get far on the 8-page steam.
Where can I find this
The bookstore's closed, the cafe's packed, nothing left to do but sing a little rap.
Well, now I'll just keep
Scan the book, pop in the DVD, and take some time, come read with me.
How's it going, bookworms, filmsters? My name is Mike, and welcome back to another BVM review. To recap our last discussion on the first installment for this trilogy, The Hunger Games was an incredible introduction to this dystopian series. The main highlight of that story was the world building and showing both readers and viewers what to expect from this world through the eyes of a teenage survivor. Following Katniss, the book guided us through the whole process of the Hunger Games, the reason for its existence, and doing whatever means necessary to survive and stand against your oppressors. While the movie wasn't visually stunning at times, it definitely proved itself as a faithful adaptation and attached a mature and heartfelt tone that speaks more with the book's material and message. Whether you prefer the book or movie, one thing we can all agree on is that Suzanne Collins created a solid YA series touching upon numerous topics and opened up discussions that could translate into our very own lives. And here we are today with its sequel. There isn't much new to say on the book side, but the movie had a change in director since Gary Ross had a tight schedule and couldn't commit, handing the reins to Francis Lawrence. On top of that, Collins didn't have a heavy hand in the screenplay like before, so that leaves the question if this series was going to be just as faithful as the previous film. That's what we're going to find out today, so sit back and relax as we return for a new adventure with the 75th annual Hunger Games. Right away, the movie begins with an incredibly gorgeous shot of Katniss looking over a frozen lake, awaiting Gale to start their new hunting route. The scene carries some familiarity to their routine like how it was in the previous movie, but the book clearly explained how things have been different ever since her victory. For starters, their hunting days have been reduced to Sundays since Gale has started working in the mines to support his family. Being the victor for District 12, Katniss is set for life and wouldn't normally need to do any of this anymore, but she does it to escape boredom and help provide for his family. However, it isn't so easy like before. One thing the book highlighted more than the movie was the amount of trauma she got from the games, and for her to envision this specific killing was something that was expressed back in book 1. Going back to the moment in the book after killing Marvel, after grieving for Rue and trying to go on with the games, she takes a moment to process the fact that she killed someone. She didn't count Glimmer or another tribute who died from the Tracker Jacker nest because it was indirect and wasn't sure if it would actually kill them. But Marvel was the first one who she actively faced with the intention to kill, and she spent a good minute letting her mind think about his family and life before repressing it to focus on the current situation. With the games now behind her, she has nothing but time to ruminate over her moral actions and reliving the nightmares that haunt her day and night.
It was just a dream, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Now, the movie showcased a decent amount of her mental trauma, but didn't exactly carry over the physical changes she got after the games. Remember that explosion she caused? By the end of the first book, her hearing was completely destroyed, so she needed a whole artificial left ear to replace it. Peeta's leg never recovered from Cato's wound, so he had to get it replaced too. And I'm jumping a little ahead of things with this, but I think it's worth noting the reality of being a victor, now that our main characters have received the title. Aside from probably District 1 or 2 who thrive on these events, no one feels victorious. Some come back more broken than before, and others are exploited beyond what was demanded of them. Their lives may seem better off, but they are still subjected to living in their piss-poor communities, having to watch from a distance as their friends and neighbors are still forced to living in this sad way of life. The only real victor is the capital, because all the riches and luxuries given to these tributes could never repair the physical and emotional damage brought on by their performance during the games. The best they can do is adjust, which is near impossible for Katniss since she is about to embark on the Victory Tour. The book describes this strategic event as a way to keep the spirit and horror of the games fresh. Midway between games, the most recent victors would need to travel from district to district, speaking to them and the families of the fallen tributes, offering condolences and basically reopening fresh wounds. And Gale doesn't want to be a part of it, or rather he shouldn't. Since the last games and what he witnessed, he was convinced that she loved Peeta over him, even though she's been persistent in telling him the opposite. But in the book, the Capitol completely rewrote their relationship status to cousins. The way this started was during the last Hunger Games when it came down to the final 8. The Capitol would send reporters to the districts of the remaining tributes to collect personal stories, and when it came to learning more about Katniss's friends, everyone would always mention Gale. But he wasn't going to cut it because A, it would conflict with the current love story between Katniss and Peeta, B, he wouldn't cooperate with the camera and play nice, and C, he was literally too handsome. So they turned him into her cousin, but that wasn't going to stop him from doing this. So that kiss scene was rearranged from another event that happened in the book, but we'll get to it momentarily. Katniss returns to her new residence in the Victor's Village to prepare everyone for the tour. She visits Haymitch and dumps cold water on his head, but not as cold as the chemistry between these two.
You two have a lot of warming up to do before showtime.
Afterwards, she returns home to find some unwanted snow hanging around. His visit should be no surprise to either of them, and he makes her responsible for damage control during the tour, to make sure that the sparks caused by the riots doesn't catch fire, so to speak. Also, this will be the start of Katniss realizing the immense target on her back as President Snow shows her footage of the kiss she shared with Gale just moments ago. In the book, he doesn't have physical proof like this, but his dialogue alone hinted the private knowledge he had on her life, specifically her Sundays with Gale. This spooked her into wondering what else he knew, leading back to a memory of reuniting with Gale weeks after winning the Hunger Games. And after a regular hunting day, he unexpectedly kissed her by the end.
I had to do that. At least once.
This was a wake-up call for her, realizing how much of her privacy she lost and that the president himself was a force to be reckoned with. Knowing this, she chooses to keep this conversation to herself while her style crew visits and prepares her for a live interview with Caesar Flickerman just before they start the tour. And boy oh boy, are they really out of practice.
How's it going?
We're good.
That's it? That's all we get? We're good?
They managed to bring it back though, even if it wasn't authentic. Really foreshadows the quality of this tour. I mean, in the next scene, Katniss snaps at Effie for reminding her of what she's done to get this luxurious treatment, and then leaves in frustration. In the book, this happened during the short train delay, with Effie rambling on about how this would affect the entire schedule, and with all the bottled fear and rage inside Katniss right now, she takes it out on the wrong person and leaves. Peeta comes by later to check on her and to make sure that there were no hard feelings about their romance being an act. The book will state that she confessed her intentions after returning from the games, which explained all the awkward tension leading up to this point. So they make an effort to become friends, sharing at least one fact about their favorite colors before making their first stop to District 11. Right away, Katniss is placed in front of Thresh and Rue's families but can't bring herself to say anything, so Peeta covers her and strays from the flashcards, promising the families 1 month of their earnings to pay respects. And right before they walk out, Katniss stands at the mic to say her piece because she felt wrong not giving thanks to Rue's friendship and contribution to her survival. Her words moved the crowd, and unfortunately, the peacekeepers as well. Haymitch takes him to a private room where Katniss tells him about her meeting with President Snow. This scene was a combination of two separate conversations in the book because she confided in Haymitch earlier during the train delay, and this scene would be Peeta's first time hearing about it. I think the order of events worked better in the book because of how it affected Peeta's character and played into this overarching theme of trust. Ever since the first games, Peeta has always felt out of the loop from this pact that Katniss and Haymitch always had, making him feel like he was too weak to handle this kind of information. This has always been a complicated relationship that often left Peeta in the dark, and as we will see later on, those feelings would eventually turn against him. But no matter how much they cry or complain, only one fact remains.
You never get off this train. Every year, your private life becomes theirs.
With everyone on the same page now, Katniss and Peeta try their best to act in the Capitol's favor by sticking to the cards and remaining as neutral as possible to the tension from the other districts. But no one is buying it, and if they can't convince the people, they certainly can't convince President Snow. They brainstorm for a new angle until Katniss offers the idea of marriage, since they're going to be stuck with this charade for eternity, so why not do it now? Despite Peeta's disapproval to the idea, it happens anyways. And they all celebrate at President Snow's mansion, where they meet this year's head game maker, Plutarch Heavensbee. I think this interaction between him and Katniss was handled much better here than in the book, only because of one specific detail. Right near the end of their dance, Plutarch pulls out his pocket watch to notice the time, and Katniss catches a glimpse of a glowing Mockingjay. As we probably know by now the significance of this symbol, it comes off as an obvious nod as to where his allegiance could lie. The book attempts to dilute this by stating that the pin and its symbol were becoming a fashion statement around the Capitol, similar to Katniss's signature braid in the movie.
Your hair looks lovely, darling.
Everyone at school wears it like this now, Grandpa.
Yet, this book has made a lot of connections between the Mockingjay and the idea of rebellion. So to read this one detail and giving it too much attention kind of ruins what Collins was trying to go for. I mean, later on in the story, Katniss encounters these two District 8 refugees, Bonnie and Twill, with the symbol of the Mockingjay stamped on their flatbread, following up with a direct quote on its meaning. Like, wow, Collins, you're really spelling it out right now. The movie, however, handled it much better, not just through Seymour Hoffman's amazing performance, but just the writing keeping his character ambiguous, low-key, and rarely alluding to anything. And yet, as I say this, that detail has an actual reason for being the way that it is. Right now, I view it as a double-edged sword because although I understand why, I still hate it. I really do, but I'll explain more later on. Near the end of the night, President Snow offers his congrats to the newly engaged, and as the fireworks set off, Katniss looks back, searching for some sign of approval, but the slow head shake said more than enough. And she understands why during the train ride home when she sees a live feed of the riots in District 8. In the book, she discovered this news at the mayor's office in District 12, but because there hasn't been any acknowledgement of him or Madge, the movie switched it to this one room that honestly should have learned the first time to keep its door shut. Meanwhile, President Snow and Plutarch are watching the riots, trying to figure out how to handle it. Plutarch suggests destroying her image by putting a heavy focus on the wedding while increasing the amount of executions delivered, in an attempt to make her seem like she doesn't care about what's happening. This scene not only adds more context as to why the Capitol was sending her wedding gowns and taking a huge part in the celebrations, but also shows Snow's understanding of Katniss and how he's not completely worried about her because she's not concerned with the rebellion, but just herself, which is true at this point of the story. As soon as she gets home, she meets with Gale and proposes they run away together, which he is on board with until hearing that it wasn't just going to be them. And once she brings up the uprisings, you can just see the hope in his face, the hope everyone expresses whenever they see her. But she isn't in the right headspace to let it affect her.
People are looking at you, Katniss.
I don't want anyone looking to me.
Their discussion is quickly subdued by the arrival of peacekeepers coming into District 12, led by Commander Thread. As mentioned in the first book, District 12 was pretty much invisible, but because of Katniss's influence, President Snow doubled down and gave this district the same treatment like everyone else. And the messed up part about it is that no one here is looking for a fight. There has been no activity of any rebellions, just talks. The people here are just trying to survive, and this new batch of reinforcements feels downright cruel. They're raiding houses, burning down the main market, and delivering needless punishment. Gale sees a defenseless woman about to be attacked until he steps in and tackles Thread. In the book, his first meeting with Thread was a lot less heroic. After this conversation with Katniss, Gale tries selling a wild turkey to the previous head peacekeeper, Cray, since it was routine of them to do business. Unfortunately, since he wasn't aware of the change in management, Gale basically admitted to illegal poaching and was sentenced to a public whipping in the main square. Katniss tries to stop it before she is slugged and given a whipping herself, and it isn't until Haymitch and Peeta step in to cease the punishment. They carry Gale back to Katniss's house to be treated by Prim and their mother, and after all the craziness, she sits by his side and waits for him to wake up. So it's at this point where Katniss decides to rebel then run, but the motivators are kinda different between book and movie. In the book, while she's sitting by Gale, she enters this deep reflection period, thinking back to the simpler days of hanging with Gale, and imagines a world where their positions were reversed, where he volunteered for the games instead of her. But the thought that really makes her consider her worth was thinking back to the Nightlock berries. She states that she doesn't remember what went through her mind at that moment, but she at least acknowledged it as an act against the Capitol. Eventually, she comes to the conclusion that her life in District 12 isn't so different than the arena, and no matter how far she runs, nothing will change, and the people she will love will continue to get hurt. This moment solidified her love for Gale and became the weight for what she promises when he wakes up.
I thought you'd be gone by now.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm gonna stay right here. Cause all kinds of trouble.
However, in the movie, it keeps the promise, but not much of the weight I just mentioned. One could assume based on the actions that happened, but I believe that she made her choice after talking with Prim, getting a verbal confirmation that whether the Capitol comes after them, they aren't as weak as Katniss presumed.
You don't have to protect me. Or Mom. We're with you.
Katniss will always try to protect Prim, and if that means going against the Capitol and taking the stand, then so be it. Speaking of the Capitol, President Snow is considering to eliminate her and her entire species after seeing the events of the whipping, warning Plutarch to keep her in line. But Plutarch isn't the slightest bit concerned since he's concocted the perfect punishment for this year's Quarter Quell.
The male and female tributes are to be reaped from the existing pool of victors in each district.
Being the only girl victor in her district, she has every reason to escape and process this traumatic outcome. But after thinking it through, she returns to Haymitch's home to make an agreement on making sure that Peeta is kept safe and alive, since they both know he'd be doing anything to keep her alive, which is proven on Reaping Day, when he volunteers for Haymitch and the two victors are escorted out with a rush. So now we are entering the second half of this story, built around the survival of the Quarter Quell. Both book and movie did a great job focusing less on the preparations because that was the purpose of the first story, going through the process of the Hunger Games. We know the routine, so there was no reason to repeat the shock and awe of it all. By removing that aspect, the story was free to focus more on building trust and alliances. There was some of that in book 1, but the fresh experience of the Hunger Games overshadowed it, making it less of a concern. However, in this book, it served the story well since Katniss needed to confront one of her main weaknesses, the ability to trust. As Haymitch puts it, the other victors have been friends for years, and if these two stand a chance, they would need to group up or risk being targeted by all of them. Haymitch does a quick study for some of the main victors this year, but I prefer the research process in the book because it led to some interesting background on him personally. In the process of learning more about the victors and their strategies, Katniss and Peeta witness Haymitch's victory during the 50th Hunger Games, or the second Quarter Quell, with the gimmick being twice the number of tributes. Not only did it relive an interesting year where Haymitch had his moment to make the Capitol look stupid, but it also shined a light on Maisily Donner, Madge's aunt, a friend of Katniss's mom, and the original owner of the Mockingjay pin. Honestly, it would have been really cool to see a scene like that in the movie, especially since Katniss learned to appreciate Haymitch a little more based on their similarities. The tribute parade is about ready to commence, but right before it starts, Katniss meets with the District 4 victor, Finnick Odair. He was the youngest victor ever to win the 65th Hunger Games at the age of 14, and has been surviving with his signature trident and incredibly good looks. I can't imagine anyone else playing the role better than Sam Claflin. Him, along with some of the other major supporting cast members, really did a stellar job in this movie, and that fact should be appreciated more. After their little chat, Katniss and Peeta get ready to ride while Cinna advises them to give no reaction to the audience and just look straight ahead. The days of looking pretty and innocent are over. Everyone knows what she's capable of now, and her volcanic dress perfectly expresses a sign of maturity and the smoldering rage building up inside her. Afterwards, District 12 heads up to their penthouse, not realizing they just stepped into the changing room of the District 7 victor, Johanna Mason.
You want zip?
Yeah.
Apparently, Jennifer Lawrence wasn't even in the same room when this happened. Coming straight from the actress who played Joanna, Jenna Malone, Jennifer was sick that day and couldn't make it to this scene, explaining her goofy ass expressions made during the strip, which honestly made it all the better. It is one of the funniest moments in the movie, and definitely the most memorable. The next day, Katniss and Peeta enter the training center in the hopes to make some allies. The movie doesn't acknowledge this, but it does make sense that half of the victors would not show up, which is why the room looks semi-empty compared to the last game. They split up to cover more ground and eye the competition until Katniss decides to be chummy with the victors from District 3, BT and Wyrus. The first thing I want to compliment is their theme whenever the attention is on them. Sounds like something out of a Knives Out movie that bounces off their intelligence. It seems slightly out of place for a movie like this, but that's what makes it so memorable and complements their character traits. They share a moment by trading information. Katniss teaching them how to make a fire, and BT pointing out the newly added force field protecting the game makers from incidents like last year. The only slight difference from this training center scene is when Katniss meets Mags, Finnick's mentor. In the book, there was a stronger sense of camaraderie between the victors. Around lunchtime, they joined the tables together and got to know each other a little more. She's making hammocks with District 1, learning more about the District 8 tributes. Eventually, Finnick will come by and introduce her to Mags. And while she's learning how to make a decent fish hook, Katniss decides to want this woman on her team after remembering her brave act to volunteer as tribute, something she could definitely relate to. In exchange for teaching her about fish hooks, Katniss shows Mags how to hunt, transitioning into her training scene that had all the other victors watching, with half of them wanting her as an ally. The book better emphasizes the unity of their efforts and understood there was no ill will towards one another. She got along with most of them, and the dread that she would eventually have to kill them brought about this line.
Peeta, how are we gonna kill these people?
When it's Katniss's turn for the private session, she sees the results of Peeta's time on the floor, a painting of Rue. In the book, this image was already cleaned off and removed, but the tension from the game makers pretty much told Katniss that Peeta did something bad. And in an attempt to keep the target off his back, she does something even more troublesome to keep the attention on her. And then it's time for the interviews, with the collective focus to express how much this whole situation sucks. You see tears, goodbyes, but no one put it more bluntly than Joanna Mason.
Everybody that had anything to do with it!
All right then.
However, Katniss is the only one here kept on a tight leash, as President Snow demanded she wear her wedding dress. But through Cinna's adjustments, he managed to turn her interview into a powerful statement by transforming her into the Mockingjay. Yet, even after a stunning performance like that, it's no match against Peeta's turn. One little lie that just puts the whole audience in a riot like it was an episode of Murray.
I wouldn't have any regrets at all if it weren't for the baby.
More! Come on,
All the tributes hold hands and stand as a united front before the entire show shuts down. Unfortunately, none of that made any difference as the games would still go on. Haymitch and Effie say their goodbyes, each one with their own gifts. Effie with golden trinkets for the boys to solidify their mark as a team, and Haymitch with one final piece of advice.
Remember who the real enemy is.
Time marches forward to the start of the Quarter Quell. Cinna is escorting Katniss all the way to the launch pad, and literally right before she is sent upwards, Collins just decided to destroy my heart by having me witness this brutal beating on my favorite character. This might as well been me smacking my monitor, hoping that he would still be around by the end of this, but sadly, this is his final farewell. This man had the drip, was always looking out for Katniss's best interest, and went out with a final screw you to the Capitol. Rest in peace, Cinna. The Quarter Quell has officially started as Katniss makes her way towards the arena, which is a lot more aquatic this time around. Once the countdown reaches 0, she runs towards the cornucopia in the center, grabbing her signature bow, and almost fires a deadly shot at Finnick before noticing Haymitch's bangle on his wrist, understanding the implication to trust. They work together to survive the chaos and locate Mags and Peeta, who is almost drowned right at the start. Once everyone is reunited, they run into the depths of the jungle terrain and begin cutting vines and looking for a safe place to rest until Peeta accidentally machetes an invisible force field, blasting himself unconscious. Luckily for them, Finnick has that CPR training and brings Peeta back to life after a couple of chest compressions. One detail from the book that didn't make it into the movie was her being questioned about knowing there was a force field in the first place. Instead of saying she learned it from BT and risked the Capitol listening in on this valuable piece of information, she lies and says that her artificial left ear could detect certain sounds. They don't question it and have her be the one leading them through the jungle until the night settles in. As they count the number of fallen tributes, Haymitch delivers a gift to Katniss, who figured out quickly that this was a spile to collect water from the trees. It took her a little longer to figure out what this was in the book, noting certain animals were staying closer to the trees with wet muzzles and remembering the past memory of collecting maple syrup with her dad back home. In any case, it was a clutch moment and they would sleep well without the risk of dehydrating. However, the sounds of tolling bells and thunderstorms were a mild disturbance, but their biggest problem will come at them in complete silence. Katniss alerts everyone to run as far as they can from the poisonous fog, but no matter which way they go, it manages to stay right on their tails. The only minor difference from the book was the moment Katniss ended up carrying Mags while Finnick took over Peeta, but that didn't last long as Katniss lost her strength and Finnick lost the functionality in his arms. This scenario was a lot more hopeless, resulting in Mags to kiss Finnick goodbye and sacrifice herself for their survival. Given one less person to think about, the trio barely managed to escape by falling down a hill and reaching a point where the fog couldn't pass. After catching her breath, Katniss notices a body of water and crawls towards it, learning that the effects of the fog were dissolving. This was a change in the book that, at first glance, may seem like an error, but makes sense once you understand how the arena works. I say it's an error because they couldn't find any pools of water lying around. That's what the spile was for. Secondly, it wasn't the water itself, but the salt that healed their wounds. In the book, they returned to the center of the arena and took turns washing themselves from these boils. For the moment, this will seem out of place, but similar to the fog, there's a gimmick where a portion of the arena will be flooded with what I assume is salt water, so a pool of this hanging around isn't so far-fetched. And having this close by keeps the pacing of the action alive as they are prepared for their next challenge, fighting off a horde of vicious monkeys. They try to hold their own as they make their way towards the beach, but like every other obstacle, Peeta is close to facing death. This seems like the end for him until one of the Mighty Morphlin Victor tributes from District 6 sacrifices herself to save him. They carry her to safety and make it to the beach, where the monkeys could no longer reach them. And just as Katniss had her moment with Rue, Peeta offers his gratitude by painting a pretty picture in her mind before it goes completely blank. She wasn't much for words, but in the book she expressed her gratitude by painting a flower on his cheek before passing, and I just thought it was worth mentioning. Later in the day, the trio reunites with Wiress, BT, and Joanna, who's had a whole adventure with them but can't deal anymore. So she leaves Katniss to clean up and watch over Wiress, who's in shock and cannot stop saying,
TikTok, TikTok, TikTok.
The timing of the lightning helps Katniss put together Wiress's words to realize that this whole arena is working like a clock, with a new threat happening every hour in their respected wedges, explaining why the fog and monkeys could only stay in a certain point. They return to the cornucopia to restock and get a better understanding of the clock theory, but leave themselves exposed to an attack from the career tributes, losing Wiress in the process. On top of that, Plutarch commands the game makers to spin the cornucopia around and confuse their sense of time, which is a temporary setback as they could just figure it out again by the waves. They touch back on land with just a few seconds of peace before Katniss hears the screams of Prim echoing in the forest. She learns that the screams were coming from a Jabberjay, which makes it even more dreadful as to how they captured that recording in the first place. Along with Finnick, they are both trapped in this wedge for the hour, having to endure the screams of their loved ones until they are allowed to reunite with the group again. I appreciate that the book offered a justifiable reason for the existence of these cries. As mentioned before, interviews are done once the games reach the final 8 tributes, and along with previous interviews, someone could have easily distorted and altered the voices to make them sound more anguished and painful. However, in the movie, they fill this scene with an outburst from Joanna towards the Capitol, and to connect this line from the book when Katniss warns her about going back into the forest where the birds were.
Can't hurt me. There's no one left that I love.
After taking a breather, BT groups everyone together to suggest his plan to electrocute the arena by attaching his wire to the lightning tree, hoping to fry the remaining tributes by midnight. As they wait, Katniss takes this moment to talk with Peeta about what to do afterwards. She's already preparing for this alliance to break once it's just them, but Peeta remains hopeful and uses this time to deliver his reasons on why she needs to live instead of him, and offers up his golden locket to remind her of the important people in her life that she needs to keep fighting for. The final plan begins as Plutarch leaves President Snow to enjoy the show, and the group hiking towards the lightning tree. BT starts splitting up the responsibility, letting the girls unwind the spool of wire towards the beach while the boys protect them from the remaining tributes. Peeta and Katniss are reluctant to separate, but are pressured into following along with the group. In the book, Katniss isn't as reluctant because she knows Peeta wouldn't be fast enough with his artificial leg, and aside from him, BT was the only other person she could really trust. They share a goodbye kiss and start the plan. It's going good so far until Katniss and Joanna are ambushed by the remaining victors, forcing Joanna to knock Katniss down with the spool and fake her death to drive the others away. At this point in the book, she's convinced that the alliance is over, especially after Finnick arrives at her spot but without Peeta. In a panic, she returns to the lightning tree, finding no one there except the sound of BT zapping himself unconscious from the force field. And it isn't long until Finnick returns to the tree where Katniss's trust is put to the final test. In the book, it was both Finnick and Enobaria who returned, with Katniss at a distance ready to fire at both of them. I think the movie's portrayal of this scene is a lot stronger because of previous scenes building up to it. There was one scene in particular that best gave weight to this moment, and it's right before the start of the game, where Plutarch and President Snow are reviewing the events of the interviews. Plutarch's words are not only to please Snow, but also to highlight what is expected of Katniss.
The more allies she betrays, the more friends she kills, the more she reveals her true self.
Her mind has been focused on just surviving with Peeta and hoping that he'd be the one to make it out alive. For the majority of this alliance, she's been questioning every motive and waiting for the second that her suspicions were right so she can act on her natural instincts to betray and act alone, which is what President Snow has been waiting for all this time. I think including Enobaria in the mix would have been pointless because even if she was put down, Katniss would still have to deal with Finnick, who's been nothing but loyal to the group. It would have ended up the same way, and whether or not Haymitch told him to say this, if it ever got to this point, it was a good choice to have him snap her out of survival mode.
Remember who the real enemy is.
Now with a clear mind, Katniss knows what to do with the approaching thunderstorm. She realized what BT was trying to do and quickly ties one end of the coil around her arrow and aims for the top. And I love this cutback to President Snow when the camera's view of Katniss, as if she was pointing the arrow directly at him. With just the perfect timing, she sends a massive shock to the force field, blowing a major hole in the arena and shutting down the entire game in general. As she lies there motionless, a hovercraft arrives to scoop her up and remove her from the battlefield. She wakes up inside the ship with BT and cautiously explores while wielding a syringe. In the next room, she finds Plutarch, Finnick, and Haymitch gathered together, revealing the start of the revolution. Between book and movie, the book had a way better payoff when this was all revealed to her. As you'd expect, the movie didn't go into much detail about this plan like the book did, so allow me to break it down. This plan has been organized ever since the Quarter Quell was announced, with Plutarch as an undercover spy working for the Capitol. He, along with half of the Victor tributes, were all aiming to break out at a specific point in the games. Katniss in particular was top priority because of what she represents, and they all knew that if she was going to follow along, they would need to keep Peeta alive. So looking back, Finnick saving his life had an ulterior motive, along with the Morphling girl from District 6 who was also in on the plan. And since Plutarch had control over the games, he was able to put in a spool of conductive wire BT got stabbed in the back for, since he was in charge of blowing a hole from the inside. The book also included these moments where the Alliance got bread as sponsored gifts, which was revealed to be code for the time of the rescue. When Joanna cut Katniss during the ambush, she was really ripping out the tracker in her arm before leading Brutus and Enobaria away. And then we get back to the watch with the Mockingjay symbol, which was intentionally shown to Katniss to give her an idea about the arena and ultimately gain her trust. Yet, even though this information was purposely shown for Katniss' sake, it still came at the cost of the reader's expense by revealing too much and lessening the impact of this well thought out plan. That, along with the reveal of District 13. This was another big difference, as the movie also revealed their destination to be District 13, where the rebellion lives. In the book, the first mention of this district was back at the beginning when Katniss met Bonnie and Twill, the District 8 refugees. I think the representation for the movie came in the form of footage from the riots in District 8, as their backstory from the book disclosed their district as always being the most rebellious. They talk about the rebellion living under the rubble of District 13, with their only proof being televised footage of the district's justice building on repeat, with a Mockingjay flying off the corner of the screen every time. However, taking them out of the story seemed like a good choice because after that one exchange, they never returned again. Within their single chapter, you would think they would have returned in Mockingjay, but they don't, leaving me to believe that their only purpose was to give hint about the possibility of District 13 still being alive, which I think was perfectly revealed here in the movie. Yet all these reveals don't matter, as Katniss just wants to know where Peeta is, and Haymitch is the one to tell her that he, Joanna, and in the book, Enobaria were all captured. She attacks him out of rage and sorrow, distracted from Plutarch sedating her into submission, and she wakes up again with Gale by her side. His presence makes her wonder if she's back home, but the lingering silence is questionable and leaves him to deliver the strongest cliffhanger from this series, both in the book and movie.
There is no District 12.
The final shot remains on Katniss' face processing the news, and as her sadness transforms into a quiet rage, the movie cuts to the first symbol of the series, further conveying her emotions as they go through each one, representing her finally being freed from captivity and embracing the burning spirit of the Mockingjay. And that is the end to Catching Fire. As a sequel, Catching Fire was a necessary addition to evolutionize Katniss' character to take on the oppressive nature of the Capitol and its dystopian dictatorship. I never noticed that the symbol for the second book had a target on the Mockingjay, which perfectly described this entire situation. The book gave a stronger focus for what PTSD looks like, and layering it with the fear and paranoia she got from President Snow made the antagonist a lot more internal than you think. It was a raw and brutal depiction Collins needed to push her heroine to the role she was destined to play. And like before, the world building is never disappointing as we learn more about the state of the other districts either by word of mouth or just seeing it for ourselves. And as you can expect from a sequel, there's more room to explore new characters and build stronger bonds with old ones. Now the book was pretty good, but it did not leave me with the same impression the movie did. If we're talking about a consistent ride from beginning to end, I believe that the movie did that better through its concentrated pacing. The first half of the book was pretty weak in my opinion, and a good portion of that came from the romance scenes. The dilemma of a love triangle was still strong, but whenever Collins let the hormones take over, it lost my attention. And I don't mean the kind of familiar love that's used as a motivator, I mean the purely physical kind centered around kisses and fan service. Just looking at the grand scale of things, my feelings basically boil down to what Katniss would say.
I can't think about anyone that way right now. There's no room for anything else.
With literally everything else going on, the romance stuff felt out of place. And I'm glad it was heavily condensed in the movie to stay focused on the war that's pretty much close to eruption. The cinematography was a major improvement over the previous film. For a world that's known for its poverty and suffering, there were a handful of moments that captured the absolute beauty in certain scenes and landscapes. That very first shot felt like a flex that set the bar for this string of gorgeous and stunning visuals. The surprise reveal at the end was executed well. The book may have had better details, but the movie controlled the information and held it all back until the time was right. The timing of it all was the most important element, and being fooled along with Katniss made for a stronger surprise. But the main reason why I'm choosing the movie is because all these positive points contributed to this story about trust. Unlike the book that spared a good portion of the story catching up with characters and backstories, all the characters, their motives, and the narrative in this movie kept the idea of trust as the central focus. Panem was never a trusting country to begin with, and President Snow took advantage of this fact to maintain his control until Katniss's unintentional actions were having an effect. He had his one chance to try and pressure her into staying within that mindset of fear and selfishness, but Katniss was able to break through her doubts and reach a level of trust to work alongside her allies, and soon enough, the rebellion. I've heard that this was the best movie in the series, and I'm inclined to agree. It was beautifully shot, thematically centered, and omitted a lot of parts from the book that held the story back from its full potential. Just an incredible film. With that said, those are my final thoughts on Catching Fire. And as always, it's just one man's opinion. So, what do you guys think of the book and or movie? Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave your comments down below, and I guess I'll see you all in the new year. Happy holidays everyone, take care.